And dozens of people are participating in a vigil in honor of Charlie Kirk in London, where freedom of speech is completely dead in this country. And people like Charlie Kirk were bearing the torch of freedom to encourage more speech. Well, that's coming from Charles Erston, also known as Billboard Chris on social media, where Charlie Kirk, a right-wing activist and close ally of President Donald Trump, was fatally shot during an event in the western U.S. state of Utah on September 10.
Freedom of speech is completely dead in this country, and people like Charlie Kirk were carrying the torch of freedom to encourage more speech, not less, because when you can't speak truthfully about things in society, that's when all the bad ideologies come along. And he was so smart and so good at what he did, telling the truth, that he was the greatest threat to the left.
Charlie was a big advocate of free speech, and he was gunned down, ritualistically by his opposition because they can't engage in free speech. So I'm here to support free speech, and I'm here to support the memory of Charlie Kirk.
As I've said, he won the youth vote in America for Trump. He really did. And he's just a great guy. And his family, my God. It's devastating, it really is.
Freedom of speech. We're meant to be the nation who's, leading the free world in terms of yes, we can have different opinions. And we're privileged to be in the West. I'm so lucky to be here in London because I've got the ability, in a lot of other countries in the world, I'll be killed for my opinions. That's kind of starting to happen in America.
Well, to discuss this, we have Doe Brooks, who's a Rice International Affairs analyst. Always a pleasure to have you, Doe. Now, let's go back to listen to some of the things that Erica did say. Now, one of them is that the movement is not dead. And let's remember Charlie at this point. Well, what are some of those things that he did stand for?
Well, I think he was, quite an icon on the right. He's a very strong supporter of Donald Trump, although he has been pushing to get the Epstein files released, which Trump does not like. But he also was with this organization, Turning Point, which was very good at basically getting the vote out for Trump. And he had these perspectives that were many people call them white nationalist. This sort of, we need to return the United States to a white male sort of leadership and domination. He had these sort of beliefs that, for example, that if black pilots are generally going to be unqualified, that they're given the jobs because of quotas or whatever. So he had some really controversial views, I think, for most people. But again, he was sort of playing to the same crowd that supports Donald Trump, this sort of cult of that is very white, that is very Republican. And Charlie Kirk was really good at getting them, as I said, at getting them out to support Trump.
And, well, if there's one message that lots of people right now are talking about is freedom of speech. Now, looking exactly at what Charlie stands for, do you get this feeling that freedom of speech is indeed under threat, like his supporters are framing it now?
So Charlie Kirk, one thing I think even the left gives him credit for is that he was willing to debate on TV, on live with people who disagreed with him. And in fact, he was killed on doing one of these things where he was going around to various universities and debating the students and so on. And I think that was... He would be someone who I think generally did support free speech, though I think the backlash now that he's been killed, the sort of theme on the right is that he was killed by leftists, which seems to be quite the opposite. But that's sort of what they want to believe. And they're kind of using it to say, okay, nobody can be critical of what Charlie Kirk was about Charlie Kirk. They've sort of deified him now in death. So, although I think he would have been more for free speech, I think his followers now are saying, maybe we need to put some limits on that because the left, the words they use are about violence and so on, actually encourage this. But I think it's fairly obvious that it's a two-way street. And in fact, there's been far more right-wing violence in the United States than there has left-wing.
And well, while we, argue or perhaps talk about more violence from the right or from the left, well, lots of Trump supporters will want to point to that shooting, more than a year ago and this one right now, and then begin to ask a question if, if they are really under threat.
I think everyone needs to be worried at this point. I mean, as you know, the United States is awash in guns. There is quite a gun culture, especially on the right-wing side, and that puts politicians at risk. And of course, there's these two people in Minnesota, a legislator and her husband that were murdered, and another member of the Minnesota House was murdered as well. So there's been quite a few murders, actually, I think, and it is worrying. And for anybody who's outspoken in the United States, it's the reality is that any sort of nutcase can get a pretty decent rifle and put you at risk. I mean, you can't guard everybody with the Secret Service like the president has. And Charlie Kirk's security was very limited, as would, I think, anybody that does that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think there's a real risk to people. It's interesting in this particular case, the risk did not come from the right, from the left, but appears to have come from a group called Groypers, who are, in fact, followers of one of Charlie Kirk's, I guess you'd say, right-wing rivals, a guy named Nick Fuentes, who's considered a Nazi. So there is that hatred, I think, even within the right, that and the right, of course, seems to be much more into the gun culture. So it does create a lot of risk for people on the right as well as on the left.
Well, I definitely would want to stay with that issue concerning gun culture and the arguments, concerning gun control. Well, sadly, Charles, Charlie's, he tilts to the right with it, but. Is this going to spur any argument, particularly, or perhaps are we going to see some actions from the right side as regards, more gun controls? Is that the discussion that they will begin to have right now with some heads, being targeted, you want to say?
No, the right is, so the left would love to have more gun regulations. There's never been a real serious attempt to ban weapons. To ban firearms, but certainly the left would love to see more controls on the kinds of weapons that are available. But on the right, in fact, there is, to get elected, essentially, you have to be a strong supporter, so-called supporter of the Second Amendment, which in many view should be nearly unlimited. So that means that you have essentially military-grade weapons that are available. That you can, in states have certain regulations on them, but in many states you can simply go in and buy essentially the equivalent of an army rifle, an M4 or M16 rifle, single shot, not a full auto, without additional paperwork. But it's these weapons are out there. There is a culture of these guns. This the alleged assassin in this case, Tyler Robinson. Grew up with guns and certainly was somebody who knew what he was doing around him. And Charlie Kirk himself, essentially said, you're going to, it's important to have the Second Amendment and have the freedom to have these kinds of weapons, and it will mean that you will have people that get killed by guns. And it's ironic that it's come back to haunt him in this way.
Well, it's quite a shame and quite ironic. But then, as people gather, to indeed say goodbye to Charlie at the Vigil, well, let's reiterate again some of those messages that indeed stands Charlie out.
Well, so as I said, the right is sort of deifying him now. There's congressmen who say he should have a statue in the Capitol. He's pushes some really bizarre notions. I think your viewers might be kind of interested because he's one of the people who supports the replacement theory. This idea that there's this sort of conspiracy in the United States to replace white people with non-white people and women, or replace white men, I should be clear, with non-white people and with women, and that there's some giant plot to sort of make this happen. They're generally anti-immigration. He was very Christian. He sort of held up these sort of far, I would call them extremist sort of Christian views. He wanted to keep the United States as a very Christian nation and put limits on Islam and other religions that have grown some in the United States. So he had these views, and he was willing to, I think to his credit, he was willing to debate these in open forums and to put himself out there and challenge viewpoints and so on. I think most people in the center and in the left would, of course, disagree with his views quite strongly. But nevertheless, he was kind of fearless in getting those out, and it is quite tragic what happened to him. But nevertheless, he was sort of himself. He was sort of a firebrand. And he did sort of stir up the debates, and like him or dislike his views, he was certainly a force to be reckoned with.
Well, it's a very fine place to leave it. Thank you so much. Well, Doc Bruce is a Arise International Affairs analyst.